Hi, welcome to Up Your Nerd Cred. Did you used to know everything that was happening in the Marvel and DC universes? Did finding out that some superheroes are from Marvel and some are from DC blow your mind? Has keeping track of everything happening there and then realizing that we're only talking about the comics universes and not the cinematic ones, and that all these different universes with their own multiversal crises have gotten a little bit out of hand? Well, don't worry. Up Your Nerd Cred is here to talk about the gods cosplaying as men, the men cosplaying as gods, and how much the cinematic universes are really leaving out. At the end of each episode, you'll hopefully know a little bit more than you did and can up your nerd cred. I'm your casual nerd host, CiCi. I had an interesting adventure this week when I attempted to re-caulk a window. I've apparently never had a new thing of caulk on my hands because, like with most of them, like I'm used to being able to just like kind of like point and go, and things like that. But apparently, like there's the tip and then there's like the little bit underneath. And actually, there's a whole extra foil liner in that thing. And so, despite me thinking that I only needed 2 holes, apparently I needed 3 holes to make the caulk work. Why are you making faces at me? I'm explaining basic maintenance things.
Yeah, and I'm just wondering if we're going to get demonetized off of YouTube for this.
Talking about what? I have it's caulk. I need to make sure I don't have, holes in the windows.
Uh-huh. Meanwhile, I'm your expert nerd host, AM Diaz, who, as a resident Nightcrawler fanboy, I have a lot to say about today's particular separate but related blue tone topic. I'm recently recovering from a bit of COVID, so bear with me as I try to stay on topic. I'm still not fully out of it, but, we're dealing with one of my hyperfixations, so we'll be okay, I assume.
Yeah, honestly, though, what it all means is that he ain't new to it. He's true to it. And also, as a reminder, is our resident expert nerd. Expert. So I'm asking him all kinds of burning questions each week. So I think the first question, though, should be, what are we nerding out about? And now, just a reminder, listeners, you can nerd out about all kinds of things. It doesn't have to just be heroes and villains, okay? Your favorite TV show has layers. Ellie the Elephant, the mascot of the New York Liberty WNBA team, is my favorite mascot. I think she may be the best mascot of all time. And also, you should Google why Matt Dowd got fired from MSNBC. And that is as political as I am going to get about the thing that happened on Wednesday. As a podcast, we do not condone political violence. We do not endorse political violence. And again, that's all we're saying about that.
Mm-hmm.
Completely separate from Wednesday's events, what are we nerding out about?
Ironically, for me at least, keeping it off the darker topics of the last week or so, Wednesday, Season 2. Part 2 of Wednesday, Season 2 just dropped recently. I did my rewatch of it, and I've got thoughts.
Do you? This is the first that I've heard about you having thoughts about a topic.
I know, right? It's just, I kind of feel like Wednesday's falling into the same problem that Once Upon a Time did. For those of you who might have remembered, Once Upon a Time was this Disney ABC show that took the Disney fantasy characters and stuff like that and put them into a retelling where they got cursed and are existing in the real world and lost memories and all that stuff. And
it was good for 3 seasons?
2 to 3 seasons roughly. I mean, season 3 you started to see the quality dropping.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem was, while the first season was the strongest, that one had a clear-cut story. It kind of felt like by the time they moved into the next season and the season after that, they were kind of just throwing things at the wall and seeing what stuck, and then abruptly dropping other plots that they started spending an entire season building.
Justice for Red Riding Hood?
Yeah, among others. And unfortunately, the same issue kind of felt like it was happening in Wednesday. And part of it was because they had to make some changes between the seasons. For example, one of their actors was caught in I believe, a domestic abuse scandal. and they had
Ooh.
to write him out of the show. Xavier, Wednesday's sort of love interest from the first season, they had to remove him out of the show because of some behind the scenes drama, possibly domestic abuse, I think, or maybe
I heard
SA.
that there was something a little inappropriate happening with him, but I heard about it
Yeah.
after he was in My Old Ass with Aubrey Plaza.
Yeah, so he was written out of the show, and they just kind of like rushed plot points or just made choices in the story where it just kind of felt like we're telling the story, we're abruptly ending the story and jumping to a different story. And not to mention the fact that 3 years jumped between seasons, and it looks like 3 years have jumped between seasons.
I
So the actors that they had look much older.
To be fair, Hero Season 2 was, a banner season, right? Yeah.
We don't talk about Hero season 2.
Yeah, well, neither we talk about
But
Bruno, but oh well.
yeah, but I mean, the show did have some good stuff going on for it. We had, some good development for the Enid and Wednesday friendship.
I did see that they did a body swap thing. Are we all Freaky Fridaying all willy-nilly
Oh yeah,
now?
this had to have been the most sitcom plot point that they could have done for a show that's as serial drama type as Wednesday is.
Mhm.
So this very much felt like, a sitcom thing that might have been in like the old Addams Family TV show or something like that.
On one hand, I appreciate like the Addams Family like having like, like, oh, like let's have like this like throwback to like a like sitcom thing. Like back in the day, like Wednesday actually had like the Wednesday from like the original like Addams Family TV show had like this cute little dance that she did. And
Yeah,
season one, Wednesday had this cute little
they'd
dance
have
that
those
she
like
did.
those kind of cute like stories where like people change roles in the family just for the sake of, well, you don't understand how it's like, that sort of thing. And
Of course.
that's very much what they did, because they wanted to have like Enid and Wednesday understand each other better,
Hmm.
which is a fun
Oh,
plot point. Well,
no.
I mean, I don't think it was like as successful as it could have been, but it did allow both actors for Enid and Wednesday to really show their acting chops, because they got each other's mannerisms and behaviors down.
I saw Jenna Ortega sit there and be like, I'll come and hang out with you guys. And I was just like, clearly this lady knows what she's doing, because her whole thing with like, she was like up there at like what the Emmys, I think, with Aubrey Plaza. And they're just like, yes, we are like really deadpan Latinas and we've like, created a whole niche for ourselves. But I'm pretty sure that both of them have a lot of fun like existing and living. I've seen them have fun existing and living in other
Oh no,
places.
and I'm sure they do, but this was one of those where it's like, this wasn't just like her having fun. This was her also completely mirroring the performance style of the other actress. Mannerisms, ticks, stuff like that. That was stuff that, the inflections in the voice just sounded perfectly set.
So they did a full face off.
Essentially. So
You
that
know
was
what?
fun, but then we got the stuff with like, they brought in the entire Addams family as not just guest stars, regulars in the series.
Isn't Wednesday at boarding school?
Yep, they found a way to write in Gomez, Morticia. Pugsley was brought in as another student, but Gomez and Morticia are there because Morticia is essentially shanghaied into becoming a parent volunteer, helping with raising funds for the school. And then there's a subplot involving the family powers and stuff like that. So they also brought
Interesting,
in,
because
yeah.
they usually have like directors of development for that thing, right? Rather than just like harassing parents who send their children there.
Well, I mean, it was one of the plot points. I don't want to spoil too much of the show,
Okay,
but essentially, one of the villains of the season was pulling some shady shit.
huh. Well, you know what? I know it's a huge spoiler that you just told me that the villain was pulling some shady shit, but while I go and process that, why don't we take a quick break and we'll be back to Up Your Nerd Cred. Welcome back. Okay, so the question that's burning me up this week is, can we talk about how Mystique is the worst mom? I
No,
think that we're
one of the worst moms.
You know what? I will take one of the worst moms, because there are a few questionable ones, but she is high on that list for me. All right.
No, and that's
So
fair. I'm still thinking about Odalia from the Owl House. So
fair. You know what? Fair. Gay. Anyway, so we are far enough away from Mother's Day that we can talk about one of the worst moms that I've been seen in comic book lore. Mystique. This lady's had like 6 kids, and only one of them was really around long enough for her to do like the most mom things, like for her to do actual mom stuff with. One of her kids is a normie, and instead of living his most Mirabel Madrigal life, decided to fight all of the mutants everywhere. I mean, look, honestly, this lady's name is Touch and Go, okay?
Well, to be fair, the genetics were not geneticking with that one.
Look, you have a
And I
shapeshifter
don't
who
mean
has
the
lived
normie
for
part. I just mean who Daddy is.
well, we will get to that. So, you got a shapeshifter. She's lived for probably a couple of centuries and does not always actually maintain the same sex when she does it. So, it's hard to keep track of all the personas she's picked up. So, we're going to start in this thing by making sure that we have formally introduced Mom, her occasional co-mom, and then the progeny.
I'm not sure I would say occasional. I'd say they're consistent.
They're not always co-momming. They're not always co-momming.
I
They're
mean,
often
they
co-mom, but not there's I will go
well,
with consistent. I will go with consistent.
it
Let's
it kind.
name co-mom before
Yeah.
we decide like how consistent she is. So, mom, the main mom that we're talking about is Mystique. So that is in fact like the code name that she currently runs by, but her given name. I've pulled this official list from Marvel. Are you ready?
Uh-huh.
Raven Darkhölme, Fox, Helmut Stein, Mallory Brickman, B. Byron Briggs, Surge, Ronnie Lake, Holt Adler, Amakai Benvesti, Raven Wagner, Lenny Zauber, Randy Green, and others. The
Well,
official
yeah.
Marvel list ends with "and others."
Yeah, well, she's basically turned into every single character in the Marvel universe at probably at some point or another. So we'd be here all day just listing off the people that she has posed as at various points. But the important thing is her legal name, and there's still kind of questions if that's her true name, Raven Darkholme.
Yeah, that's how we're generally going to refer to her as. So she made a cameo in Miss Marvel number 16 in 1978 and made her full debut in Miss Marvel number 18. And of course, as of ever, created by Chris Claremont and Dave Cockrum. Okay, Chris loves giving us our queers.
He does indeed.
Chris also gave us Destiny, whose legal name is Irene Adler. We first met her in Uncanny X-Men number 141 in 1981, created by Chris and John Byrne. So we have like the
Yep.
kids. So we have
Oh,
Graydon
wait.
Creed. Wait,
Do
who
we
do we
want
miss?
to?
No, we're
I'm just
going
wondering, do
to.
we want to mention what Irene's connection is with Miss Raven?
Well, Irene is co-mom. Irene is the co-mom.
Yeah, for those of you
So
who might not be as familiar with Destiny, she has made a few appearances. Unfortunately,
a
the only
few.
big one in other media. So her biggest one was in X-Men Evolution. She did make an appearance as Rogue's mother, and they couldn't do anything overt, but they implied partner of Mystique.
Okay, well, let's get there because Mystique be having all these babies. So let's talk about the various kids that she's got.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we've got Graydon Creed. His debut was X Factor number 82 in 1992. He was created by Scott Lobel and Joe Quesada. Rogue, who does not actually have a surname revealed yet, but her legal name is Anna Marie.
Well, she doesn't have like a pre-married, but currently Anna Marie LeBeau. She is married to Gambit.
You know what? That is fair. Some married women be taking their husbands' names. I mean, I didn't, but some women be doing that. So, okay. So she was, of course, created by Chris and Michael Goldman. We have, who is this person? Neat Krula? Whose legal name is Kurt Wagner, whose debut issue was in Giant Size X-Men number 1, created by Lynn Wein and Dave Cockrum. We've got Gloria Brickman, whose legal name is Gloria Brickman, because, like this child was actually technically adopted under one of Raven's various aliases. So she showed up in Uncanny X-Men number 265 in 1990. Chris was her creator, as well as Bill Jaska. We've got Charles Xavier II, aka Charles Xavier Jr. We don't have to sit there and make him like, the favorite son or whatever, but his debut issue was in X-Men Battle of the Atom number 1 in 2013, created
Just gonna
by
say, I did not like that character or the next one.
Brian Michael Bendis and Frank Cho. And we also have Raze Darkhölme, which I guess is like, all right, he's got like the original family name. Finally, one of them has it. Um, so this child came about in All New X-Men number 29 in 2014 and was created by Brian Michael Bendis and Stuart Immonen.
Mm.
So cycling back to Mystique or Raven or Holt or whatever the name of the day is, should I actually be impressed that she's only had these 6 kids? I mean,
She's only
only
had
2 of
these
these.
6 kids that you are aware of, because the joy of comics is every few years, a writer's gonna come on and be like, "Hey, what if she had another kid?"
Okay, so I thought that she was just like shape-shifting her way through birth control. What is happening? Like with
Well, to be fair, a lot of these kids are either adopted
Mhm.
or from alternate universe timelines where they don't actually exist in the current timeline or will never
Wow.
exist in the current timeline.
You
So
really
that would
don't
be the
like
case.
Charles II or Rays, do you?
Honestly, no. They were very cliched, forced characters. It's like, oh, let's introduce the children of a bunch of different X-Men and let's just, continue to just pile on to Raven by having her have the kid of both Xavier and Wolverine.
Yeah,
So
no,
yeah.
that's a lot. Okay, well.
It's like Brian Michael Bendis is sometimes a divisive writer.
Mhm.
And he's done stuff that I really enjoyed and stuff that I really loathe. Unfortunately, some of the characters I introduced during this particular run of X-Men, Battle of the Atom, and All New X-Men were not high on the list for me. But to be
Okay,
fair, Raven, as far as we know, has only 2 overtly biological children in the main timeline.
okay.
So that would be Nightcrawler, Kurt Wagner, and Graydon Creed. Those are the official biological children that I'm currently aware of.
Okay. So I will say that my understanding is that she's managed to stay somewhat undercover during her time as Raven Wagner, but that Kurt's birth stressed her back to blue, which doesn't make sense because Irene was the mom. So, like, what's happening with that? And was that the last
Yeah,
time
so
that she popped out, they popped out a kid without her status being known?
so here's the thing. The original intent by Chris Claremont was he wanted to have Raven and Irene be Nightcrawler's parents. That Mystique transformed into a man, impregnated Irene, and that's how Nightcrawler was born.
Hmm.
But it was the 80s, and anti-gay sentiments were very prominent,
But a man
especially
and a
in
woman love each other very much.
but she wasn't consistently a man, and they would still have been a lesbian couple. So they weren't even allowed to be officially a couple at the time. They were just really close friends. They
Wow.
were
Were they
roommates.
cousins? Yes, and at some
So,
point, we are probably gonna have to do a Sailor Moon shout out because I keep talking about the whole, like, Neptune and Uranus cousin thing, but moving on.
but yeah, so the original intent was that, Raven and Irene were going to be a couple, but unfortunately, Claremont was not allowed to pull the trigger on that. They kind of kept the story a little bit interesting because part of the reason why, they were able to kind of avoid too much was Irene was considerably older looking than Raven was, but
Mhm.
they were both very old women at the time, essentially.
Yeah,
But the thing is, that was the intent. That wasn't what happened at the time.
right.
And instead, they created a backstory where Raven posed as Wagner, the Countess of a vaguely Eastern European area, and she had a child with that guy, and out popped Nightcrawler. The birth was so overwhelming and all that stuff. But then, a few years back, during the fall of Krakoa,
Mhm.
some writers decided that it was time to basically go back to what Chris had always wanted to do.
Good.
Thus comes the new retcon. And in this one, it was revealed that while and Raven had been, well, their relationship had been canonized years ago by Claremont when he was
Mhm.
writing Extreme X-Men.
But
He made it official, like these were lovers. They were 100% romantic.
for real.
And that was not, yeah, because from the introduction until that storyline, Flea, Extreme X-Men, a little bit beforehand in the regular X-Men books too, but it was firmly established in Extreme X-Men. They were lovers. No ifs, ands, or buts. They were romantic partners. They raised a child together. Maybe not the one that we're talking about now, but
A
and
child.
exactly. And they revealed that while they were together, they had an open thing. So they were allowed to take on other lovers. They were allowed to like go off and do their own things and come back together.
I mean, if you're that old, you kinda get bored with
Well,
the
yeah,
same person
because
occasionally, right?
one of my favorite additions to the mythology was that Raven and Irene Adler. For those of you who are familiar with Sherlock Holmes, there's a character called Irene Adler who's in the books not really
The
much of a
woman.
character. Yeah, but in other adaptations, she's like a love interest for Sherlock. Well, it turns out that Irene Adler is actually Irene Adler. Sherlock Holmes is Irene Adler, and Raven
But
herself
who was
was
Sherlock
Sherlock.
Holmes in?
Well, a certain shapeshifter. And so, they met when Raven was posing as a detective and they fell in love and that's how they got together. But they
Wait,
had
are
that
you suggesting that Sir Arthur Conan Doyle just kind of lived his most John Watson life in the Marvelverse instead of actually coming up with all of these stories on his own?
kind of, yeah. That's been heavily implied. But going back to the birth, while Raven was posing as Raven Wagner, Irene was, hanging out and kind of posing as a maid or lady in waiting for Raven. And it's a very complicated
It's
story
worth noting,
involving
by the way,
a
that Raven was like, a countess at this point. She's not like, just like there's a lady in waiting because she's like a peerage kind of thing, not
yes,
just because she's just a random lady who has a lady in waiting.
yeah. But so it gets really complicated because there were storylines that happened involving a character called Azazel, and that he was supposedly the real baby daddy. But essentially, Irene decided they needed to have a baby to deal with the threat of Azazel.
Mhm.
And so she told Raven, I want you to put a baby in me. And Raven did. So Raven's
Lesbians
shapeshifting ability.
across the world are punching the air, just being like, "What do you mean I can put a baby in my wife?"
Well, Raven's powers are a bit more powerful than some other shapeshifters. So, where others just take on the form of someone, she's able to duplicate down to the genetic level. She can create working sexual organs, and she can like take and replicate the DNA from other people. So, when she becomes somebody, she becomes them down to the genetic level.
Okay.
And as a result, she took the genetics of Azazel and of Count Wagner and, herself, transformed either fully into a man or just transformed to have male organs. They're kind of,
The lesbians are so
vague
mad
on
that
that.
they don't have the strap.
But she impregnated Irene, and that eventually resulted 9 months later in the birth of Kurt Wagner. But Raven didn't like where in the original story she lost control during childbirth and transformed back into a blue being.
Hmm?
Instead, she chose to transform back into her true self because she wanted her baby to see her as she was, as she really was. And while
Then,
everyone around them is freaking the fuck out, Irene and Raven are having a nice family moment. But
uh,
unfortunately, they had a moment. They had a moment. But then angry villagers, like the count had died at one point too, and well, it turned out this was all kind of a plan by Destiny. For those, I don't think we mentioned this. Destiny's ability is to foresee the future. She has
right.
visions of what is to come, and she knew that her and Raven could not raise Kurt together.
Mhm.
Instead, she created a situation where Raven would have to leave Kurt behind, and Irene would disappear, and Raven would not find Irene, and then come back and not find Nightcrawler.
Mhm.
Nightcrawler, meanwhile, had been taken in by a traveling circus and raised by the gypsy Magali, I think her name is. I can never remember how to pronounce her name.
The Romani Margali
Yeah,
Zardos? Yes.
yes. And he was raised in the circus with the Romani family and with his foster sister and future lover, Amanda Sefton. But he had a very troubled life, but at the same time, he had this boundless hope and joy and positivity that was prove essential to defeat Azazel, who would try to take over the earth in the future.
Okay, so between Christian Wagner not technically being his dad, Azazel not technically being his dad, Margolis Dardos being his adoptive mom, and
Is that how you
Irene
pronounce it?
Adler. I don't. I
Margoli?
think so. Margali. That's what.
Yeah, I've
That's
never heard it said in media, so I'm never sure.
well. I mean, I'm not gonna lie. Epitone and archangel doesn't make sense if you're, just learning to read words either. But also, so Kurt was, has Kurt ever thought about, like, changing his name once we found out how wild his birth story was? I mean, not picking up Darkholme makes sense because his like, Raven did low-key throw him off a cliff as a newborn or something.
Not well, that was the believed memory of what happened, but in the revised continuity, she left him by a tree. She did not throw him off a waterfall. So that part's been retconned out to make her less of a psychotic mother. Well, yeah, because one thing I also didn't mention was after Raven lost the baby in the woods, and
Mhm.
after Irene disappeared, eventually they reconnected because despite everything, they still loved each other, and also Raven wanted revenge, as one wants.
Of course.
And they did have their memories altered by, surprisingly, Charles Xavier. They asked him to wipe their memories of what happened. So Irene got a full mind wipe. She did not remember giving birth to Kurt or anything like that.
Okay.
Raven got a partial mind wipe, and her memories were altered to have the previous throwing the baby off the waterfall sort of thing, but she still remembered having the baby
Okay.
because she refused to completely give up her child. But the altered memories kind of resulted in her having some rage.
That's the way to describe it. Okay. So, well, in one of the comic canon, consistent canon things that I would say that Mystique was a goodish mom. There was a point in time when Destiny had a prophecy that Miss Marvel would hurt Rogue, their adopted daughter, because, of course, Destiny and Mystique decided that they eventually wanted to raise a kid. And so they're just like, oh, here's this random surprise, like, mutant child who sucks away all of, like, the memories and powers and energy of other people. Let's raise her. Yay! Isn't
Well, she wasn't a baby. At the time that Rogue was found, she was in the cusps of puberty because her mutant
right
powers had
before
already
everything starts.
yeah, because her powers had already manifested at this point.
Wait, what?
And
I th
yeah,
I thought the kids got to have, like, a relatively, like, Homo sapiens childhood and then, like, puberty kicks in.
unfortunately, no. By the time that Rogue was found by Mystique and Irene, her powers had already manifested. She had kissed her first boy and stolen his memories and had almost killed him. Or she had killed him. I forget. It changes on the different continuities, but I think she may have killed him when her powers first manifested. And the thing
And
was,
see, so the Anna Paquin scene was fairly canon then of the X-Men movies?
roughly, yeah. She
Eh,
almost killed him in that one. But yeah, in the you know, largely in the revived story after Nightcrawler was lost and all that, and before Xavier erased their minds, Irene foresaw both Rogue and the future they were going to have together.
mhm.
And so this is a questionable part of the retcon, but essentially, Irene knew what happened to Rogue and knew where she would be, went to the park, and sat there watching Rogue after she had run away from home, after she had put Cody into a coma or killed him. I
Okay.
forget which. And Raven showed up with a gun ready to shoot Irene in the head for what happened to Kurt. But Irene had a peace offering. This poor child who was in moments away in danger of being assaulted by someone. And if they didn't act now,
Wow.
yeah. So Raven, who desperately wanted to be a mom and who saw this girl who needed help, completely her and Irene threw themselves into being parents to Rogue. They took her in and they did give her as normal of a life as they could for the longest time.
Mhm.
I mean, they were still working as mutant freedom fighters, terrorists, but
Yeah,
they
Rogue
had
did
a
get pulled into the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, which is a
yeah.
interesting
But
name to join a group for.
But the thing was, despite all that, despite the fact they were still fighting, against humanity and all that stuff, they had a home. They gave her a house. They spent Christmases with her and taught her, to be a strong, powerful woman. And they loved her completely and totally.
It's
So
beautiful.
Rogue did have a good life with them, but
Yeah, but then,
eventually
there was a
they
time
didn't
that
hide the fact that they didn't hide the fact that they were mutant terrorists. And
they were part of the
eventually
Brotherhood of Evil Mutants that Mystique started. I should hope not.
yeah. Well, I mean, some versions of the stories, uh, have it where Raven is not completely honest with Rogue on times.
That makes sense.
X-Men Evolution had it to where Rogue lived a completely normal life. She had no idea that one of her moms, even, that's mutant terrorist, didn't know her parents had powers. X-Men, the animated series, had it to where she didn't even know what Mystique really looked like.
Okay. Wow.
But yeah, eventually she did join the Brotherhood. She had a very tumultuous interaction with Miss Marvel, later Captain Marvel, aka Carol Danvers.
Yeah, see, that's the thing, like, there's this whole, like, prophecy about, like, Rogue's gonna get hit or, like, I'm sorry, not hit, like, gonna get hurt by Miss Marvel, and, like, the reason that she got hurt by Miss Marvel is because Rogue didn't get her hands off Miss Marvel fast enough, and she was only fighting Miss Marvel to prove to Mystique that she didn't need to be coddled and protected, which is something that Mystique was doing because of, like, I'm just saying, fighting the future makes it true, bro.
Yeah, well, that is the problem with that Raven or not Raven. That Irene always says the future is constantly flowing and changing. So her visions are 4 out of 5 times never 100% accurate to what will happen.
I mean,
Especially if she looks too far into the future, which she had done with Rogue. She saw very far into the future, and a recurring story in the comics is her Destiny books. These journals that she kept, where she wrote all of her prophecies down. And some of them came to pass as they did, and other ones completely different from what she foresaw. And yeah, unfortunately, Irene's vision is not always 100% clear. It's pieces, it's parts. So,
Irene is
yeah.
blind, so her vision isn't 100% clear in general. And I should clarify, she's blind because she spent all of her like, she already had poor vision, and she blew the rest of it writing down all of those prophecies. So we're all on the same page.
Yeah. Not to mention the fact that she got really old for.
Yeah, no, like, the fact that she is able to do anything at all is impressive because, again,
Oh,
like,
yeah, no.
just slowly, but
She
she's
looked like Aunt
very
May
old.
old, and she still wore like a skin tight bodysuit and was like in the field fighting. So
Okay,
give it
are you gonna tell me
give it
that
to old
Batty
lady.
Winkle would not have been out in the field if she needed to? Also, RIP Batty Winkle, okay, the flyest grandma on Instagram. Um,
Yeah. But yeah, it's like but she was right, Rogue was hurt by Miss Marvel, but not in the way they expected, because the hurt was when Rogue put her hands on Miss Marvel and couldn't let go fast enough. She gained all of Miss Marvel's abilities. She also had Miss Marvel as a roommate
in her
inside her
head.
head.
Yeah.
Yeah, Carol was slowly driving Rogue insane with her memories and her anger and rage. Carol would
Yeah.
recover, but would never quite be the same, and
It's
neither would
hard to
Rogue.
when, like, your whole, like, psyche has been psyched out by somebody else, and you're sitting
Mhm.
there seeing somebody else as your psyche. It's you know what? I'm not
Yeah,
gonna sit
and
there and
that
think too deeply about that.
yeah, but all that on top of it ended up causing a schism between Rogue and her parents, because she ended up not getting the help she needed. And so she sought out that help with the X-Men, resulting in her
Uh
joining the heroes and putting her at, even to this day, it's like things are better for them, but they're still at odds.
Well, I mean, to be fair, in general, she doesn't necessarily have good relationships with her kids overall. Graydon Creed tried to have her killed by his own dad, so that's
Hmm.
a moment.
Yeah,
And then she
Creed
tries to kill
is
him back, and Rogue and Nightcrawler are just like, no.
well, yeah, here's the thing.
Being mature isn't one of her powers, is it?
Yeah. Graydon Creed is one of those who's a bit of a messy character in many ways.
Mhm.
He is the result of a brief fling between Mystique and Sabretooth.
Mhm. How'd that work out?
Ni- Neither of them wanted him, so he ended up really hating both of his parents and hating mutants. And Graydon went into politics and started targeting mutants. He ran on a completely anti-mutant platform,
Him and
not
Senator
topical at
Kelly are
all.
probably best good friends, huh?
And, well, yeah, he tried to take out a hit on Mystique using Sabretooth. He has regularly tried to hurt or kill X-Men, and Mystique did try to kill him and then eventually succeeded in killing him, thanks to time travel shenanigans.
I mean, is this something where she actually wanted to take him out, or was she, like, kinda forced to take him out? Because, like, I was not 100% sure of what was happening with that one.
She wanted to take him out. If I'm honest, I think she wanted to. She saw him as too much of a threat and knew that he had to die. But a part of her is still like she was still his mother, so there was some regret deep down there.
I respect that, you know? We need to talk about Kevin. We need to talk about Graydon. Stop naming your children names that like end with N. What? No, actually, I don't think N is the problem. Just don't be a psychotic mother if you have that. Excellent. Oh, um, with Destiny having all of these like predictions about mutant kind being in danger and Raven coming and being like, I will save everything. Have they at any point figured out that trying to fight the future brings it to pass?
Well, I mean, here's the thing. Eventually, Irene died. She was killed, and this was very traumatic for Raven, and she spent the next few decades spiraling really bad.
Mm-hmm.
You know, she ended up being a member of X Factor. She regularly went back to being a villain. Sometimes she'd try to be a mother. Sometimes she would try to be, a sociopath. She, at many times, probably stabbed her children at various points. Like, I think she
Yeah.
stabbed Rogue at least twice at some point.
Didn't she have like a weird thing with Iceman where instead of just like flirting with him like a normal person, she's like, I'm gonna fight you?
Well, Raven's had things with a lot of people. So she had something with Xavier, apparently. She had something with Wolverine, Sabretooth, Iceman. And Iceman, this was pre-gay Iceman.
Yeah.
So he had still not come out yet. And I kind of feel like that was probably the
Her
reason.
having attraction to him by like, trying to fight him, like,
Well, I don't think she was truly attracted to him. I think she was using him. I mean, she
oh.
might have thought he was like a fun roll in the hay, like some stress relief. But I don't think she really had any deep feelings for Bobby.
That's fair. Although I will say that, like, the bisexual and the gay hooking up at some point before the gay comes out is something that has happened in many times in the life. And
Yeah.
I'm, s- you know what? I'm really glad that they figured their stuff out because I don't need them to
Well, I
be weird
mean,
about things.
yeah, she always knew what she was about.
Yes, I
Raven always
know,
knew.
but him not knowing what he is about,
Yeah.
that takes a little bit more time. And
Well,
I'm
Bobby's a
honestly,
whole other, you know, thing that would take hours to deconstruct. But yeah, so,
didn't
you know,
Jean actually finally tell him who he was and be like, I'm sorry, I didn't know it was
yeah,
a secret.
let's not jump into Bobby. Let's not jump into Bobby because that again is he needs an
We'll
entire
talk about
episode
Bobby at
dedicated
some point.
just
Bobby will get an
yeah.
episode.
But with
All right.
Raven, she had a lot of like part of it was I would say mental health issues, a lot of trauma, a lot of anger, and she got really messed up. And but eventually, as all things keep doing, it led to Krakoa.
Yeah, I did see something where someone said that all of the transformation that she did down to the molecular level is part of the reason that she had such mental instability because being able to maintain a singular identity is really hard when, like, at a basic genetic level, your identity is whatever it is that you decide to be in that day. Like, there are phases, and then there's just like, I want to be, this guy for like 20 minutes.
Yeah, and that could be very much the case, especially with how long Raven's been alive and how many people she's posed as.
Oh, yeah.
And again, her grounding, the one person throughout her life that grounded her was gone. That was Irene. But as we mentioned before, on Krakoa, death means nothing.
True.
But the problem they had during that period was precogs were not allowed to exist on Krakoa.
What? Okay, I didn't realize that we were like, like racists against like precog mutants. Rude. I
Well,
thought we were all like mutants. So we're not Homo sapien superior. What's up with that?
this was a requirement issued by Moira McTaggart, who, as we've discussed in a previous podcast episode, was turned out to be a mutant herself who kept getting reincarnated into different lifetimes.
Why would Moira McTaggart not want to have Mystique's wife come by?
Because in a previous Moira life, the Brotherhood attacked Moira, who was developing a cure for mutants.
Mm-hmm.
And they were like, bitch, we aren't doing this. We are not allowing this. So either you need to find a better way to help mutant kind, or we're going to kill you. In fact, we're going to kill you this time. And they burned her alive. And so
On the plus
Moira, as a
side, we
result,
discovered that Moira is actually like, got a good reason to make sure that the mutants stay alive as a whole, right?
for a time, I mean, it got messy with her, but as we've talked before, long story short, she didn't want any precogs who would ruin her plans, who would see the future, see where she existed in it. She needed them out. So she refused to let precogs be born using mutant resurrection protocols. And Xavier and Magneto went along with that because they wanted to make Moira happy in this sense.
Are
But
they both sleeping with Moira? I thought that, like, okay. I mean, whatever
I
works
mean,
for them, I
I don't
guess.
think anybody was sleeping with Moira at this time. Moira was
So
kind of
Moira's just like
full-blown.
Moira's just dictating who's
Moira
allowed to
had
be reborn?
Moira had none of the warmth or humanity that she had before. She was very cold and calculating in this new lifetime.
I don't like this Moira.
She's also a divisive factor in X-Men. But anyway, so we got the whole issue with that. Raven refused to let, that be the case. And thanks to some manipulations and help from Hope Summers, Irene was resurrected and they were reunited.
Good, right?
Much to the anger of Moira, Xavier, and Magneto. But especially Moira because the girls were back in town and they're pissed.
Well, I mean, if you sit there and try and break lesbians up, it's not going to end well.
Nope. And they tried to kill her, and the only reason Moira survived was because Doug Ramsey and Warlock interfered.
Like I said, bitches get stuff done. Anyway, we're going to take a quick break, and then we'll be back up to Up Your Nerd Cred. Hi, welcome back to our thrilling conclusion. So, to answer the question for the top of the episode, is Mystique, in fact, the worst mom?
Well, like I said at the start, I feel like there are worse moms to Mystique. She's not a good mom, mind you. She has done a lot of messed up things from, really unnecessary terrorist acts to stabbing her children to kidnapping a baby and forcing the baby to touch Rogue with the possibility of maybe even killing the babies. Yeah, we didn't even touch on that part.
Yeah,
So
there
she's
was a
not
whole
she's
thing. But to
not
be fair, Mr. Sinister
Yeah.
was involved with that. So that, we should have a whole
Fair.
episode about that guy.
fair, but Mystique's stuff was going on because of Irene's prophecies. So, but anyways, she is not a great mom. She is a very problematic mom. But thanks to a lot of retcons in recent years, we do see that a lot of the stuff that she has done was not always malicious and sometimes completely different than we thought it was.
That's
And
fair.
one thing that's been really nice about recent things, I know some people disagree, but they have had to where, since Irene came back, Raven and Irene have both been trying to build a family with Kurt and Rogue. They
I
have
mean,
had
that's
family days together. Like there's a story where the four of them had a picnic together and they were just trying to connect. Irene and Raven had a renew your vows, and
how can you renew your
they
vows
got
if you
weird.
weren't when did they get married?
Well, I mean, they were alive for years, and Raven could pose as a man, so.
Yeah, I know, but Deadpool has a divorce certificate from Mystique.
No, like I say, they're married one way or another, whether or not it was
Okay.
legal or whatnot. Because even when they got remarried, they had Rogue and Nightcrawler standing up there, and Nightcrawler was performing the ceremony. And when he said, "Do you take each other to be your lawfully wedded wives?" And they say, "We spit on the law, so tell them they're not married. I dare you."
No. No. No.
But
No.
yeah, so they're trying, and Raven is trying. Whether or not she's succeeding will depend on what new writers will say and do. But is she the worst mom? I feel like there are worse ones out there, but she is definitely not a good mom.
You know what? I think that what I am going to do is I'm going to call my mom later and be like, hey, I know you were frustrated with me sometimes. I know you were convinced that nobody would ever kidnap me because I would talk too much for them to keep me and they would bring me back. But thank you for not thinking that you threw me off of a cliff or something. Not thinking that you would be the kind of mom who would need to throw me off a cliff. That's something, I suppose.
I mean, to be fair, I feel like every parent at one point or another has considered it.
You
During
say
those,
that, but I can't
3
say anything about this.
a.m.
I
periods.
have a toddler. I can neither confirm nor deny how parents sometimes feel about their toddlers. What I will say, though, is it's time for our debuts and premieres and anniversaries. Oh my! Please, please, please do not think about someone throwing a toddler off the cliff or a newborn off the cliff. So we have Red She-Hulk being introduced in Hulk Volume 2, number 15, 2009, which was September 16th, 2009. Vision joined the Avengers in Avengers number 57 in 1968, as written by Stan Lee and John Buscema, and that was September 17th, 1968. We had Spider-Gwen, or Ghost Spider, first appearing in the Edge of the Spider-Verse number 2 in 2014 on September 17th. And also, again, Eric Voss will love this. Stan Lee and John Buscema introduced one of Marvel's most iconic villains, Mephisto, in Silver Surfer #3 on 9.
Who finally got introduced into the MCU in Ironheart after decades of people going, "Is that Mephisto? Is that Mephisto? Is that Mephisto?" We finally got
You
him.
mean that wasn't Mephisto in the stained glass? That wasn't Mephisto sitting there? Anyway, there's so many instances where it was supposed to be Mephisto and it wasn't. And honestly, I'm kind of excited to see what Sacha Baron Cohen does, mostly because of the fact that I really enjoyed him as Pirelli. And I realize that Pirelli and Mephisto aren't quite the same, but they're kind of scammers who are really annoyed about the prospect of not coming out on top of their scam. So maybe actually kind of.
Just so long as he doesn't go stealing Spider-Man's marriage in whatever movie Tom Holland ends up in, I'll be happy.
We need to have Tom Holland and Zendaya get I'm sorry, Spider-Man and MJ get married first before we have that kind of thing be an issue, okay? So calm down.
I'm just saying. It's
Okay,
been
well,
decades and we still have not gotten Mary Jane and Peter married again.
yeah, I know, but we can all sit there and make very strong faces about it. Unfortunately, though, listeners, we have in fact come to the end of our podcast. I know, you're clearly devastated about it. How is it over so soon? Well, good news! We've got another episode coming out next week. And you're also more than welcome to listen to this episode or any of the other ones if that's not fast enough.
Nerd cred takes time to build.
But if shapeshifters like Mystique and Rose Quartz can stick with the form long enough to gestate, I suppose I could sit down with the braiders for a few hours, right?
And now it's time to mention that we have an Instagram. We're on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube, and working to expand our reach. If you like the episode, make sure to rate, review, and subscribe, especially if you're trying to up your nerd cred.
You can follow us across Instagram at Up Your Nerd Cred Pod. If you're looking for me across platforms, I'm at Kira C. Davis.
And I'm AM Diaz Art. Come yell at me about continuity errors and show me your fan art. Either way.
Right.
If you have a burning question that you want us to discuss so you can up your nerd cred, make sure you like and subscribe, leave comments, and if we pick your question, we'll shout you out in the discussion segment.
Also, please make sure that you get your friends to also like and subscribe to the pod, and like your family and those coworkers that you trust not to be weird about listening to the same podcast as you, and like that person on the bus.
And good night, everybody.